This podcast is created for farmers and powered by Pioneer Agronomy to bring you agronomic insights and proven solutions to fuel forward-thinking farming.
Good morning and welcome to the February 1st edition of the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy Podcast. I'm Brian Schrader, agronomist on the east side of Indiana, joined as always by my fellow co-host Carl Joran on the western side of Indiana. Good morning, Carl.
Hey there, Brian. How are you today?
Very good. Getting a little chilly. Temperatures dropping here today. And so had to turn the heat up in the office this morning a little bit.
I hear you. My feet are planted firmly on the space heater right now, down in the basement where my office is too. So I'm with you. It's starting to feel like winter finally around these parts.
Very much so. And with that thought of winter, your and I's task over the next several weeks will be to conduct a number of customer meetings. Our winter agronomy meetings or roundtables, lots of different names for these. And certainly over my 20 years, those meetings have changed from huge, large gatherings to small table meetings and things like that. But we've got a guest on today that's going to help you and I with that preparation, but also help answer a question or questions that you and I are getting a lot. And I'm really pleased to have Brandon Emery with us today. Brandon's the biological product manager for Corteva Crop Protection and that portfolio. And he's been kind enough to join us today to talk to us about anything and everything Corteva biological. So Brandon, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Hey, Brian and Carl. Yeah, thanks for having me. It seems like, there's a number of questions that always get thrown around with biological. So happy to come on your guys' platform and talk to a good audience about what they are, how to look at them, etc. So yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem. So Brandon, maybe just give us a little bit of your background and how you arrived at the product management role for the biological portfolio.
Yeah, so I was a crop protection territory manager for 4 years prior to coming to the mothership in Indianapolis here. And what I thought was real interesting about that time is, just from the start of that time to here we are today, the interest that biologicals has really peaked. And, you see some of these new companies coming to market, you see these growers starting to ask questions. And as Corteva started to decide that they were going to enter the space, really definitely piqued my interest and wanting to kind of help folks navigate it and integrate these products. And so that was really the driver for me on wanting to come over to Indianapolis and work with this portfolio. It's considered the Wild West in a lot of ways, but I think that lends itself to some potential. And so yeah. It's going to be a fun little endeavor being the product manager, and look forward to working with my Pioneer counterparts.
Well, as you said, it is turned out to be, at least of late, the wild West. And when you say that, I think, as you mentioned, you've got a lot of companies, both Corteva and otherwise, from a large standpoint, that are trying to open this space up. And I'd even argue, from a Corteva standpoint, legitimize it in some respects. But you've also got a lot of other small companies that have decided to jump into this space. So I guess maybe let's start here. Why biologicals and why now? Why 2022, 2023? What makes this such an important space for growers and for organizations that are getting into this particular part of protection?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things that are whirling around in this space that I think lends itself to the amount of entries and interest. Number one is the research and development capabilities for these companies and for biologicals has increased dramatically, where maybe 10, 15 years ago, you'd have somebody trying to do a concoction, but not really having a real shelf-stable product or ability to go into a solution and tank mix. Maybe efficacy is variable. And so I think where we've come a lot of ways with just the research and development, so that we're actually, there is some good products out there that growers can select from in this space. So I think when you start to build some credibility in your development capabilities, that's where the products and the interest come along. So that's one facet. The other is the changing consumer demands. You know, corn is one area, but there's a lot of specialty crops, et cetera, where consumers are asking for something different. They're saying, hey, could you look at your crop production systems and maybe integrate some of these types of things? So I think you're seeing a shift in consumer demand. And then in addition, you're seeing an increase in regulatory oversight over some of our traditional chemistries. So you're seeing some of these tools like Lorsban, for example, you know, having a lot more stricter uses. And I think that lends itself to growers and retailers and across the board going, okay, I see how some of this is going. How could we think differently about how we're going about our crop management plans, and biologicals could be a piece to that. So I think those are the big three things that you're seeing that are driving this whirlwind here.
Sure. So, you know, you talked a little bit about credibility, and I think that is a key piece. I think that's one of the things, as you mentioned, with even Corteva's research and development program, there is a level of credibility there because of all of the testing that we do, not only on the seed side for all of our products and what that looks like, but also we've got a long history of developing crop protection products. So we use that term biologicals kind of as a large, wide, sweeping type of description for these products. When we get into R&D, what are we really talking about when we talk about biologicals? You know, what are the organisms? What are the things that we talk about really, I guess, to help folks understand what biologicals really mean?
So biologicals it's a really broad net that is cast over a lot of different types of products. But one way that I kind of look at it and start to break it down is you have biocontrol and you have more the biostimulants, biofertility side. So those would be the two big buckets. Biocontrol could be anything from macroorganisms like ladybugs and things like that. They're going to be feeding on aphids or, you know, parasitoid wasps. Corteva has decided we're not going to play in that space, but that would be a biocontrol technique or method. There's also, you know, the other types of biocontrol options, which would be something like a virus that is very specific for a specific type of, you know, worm that isn't going to kill any of the beneficial insects out there. So that would be another type of a biocontrol option. You also have the biostimulant and the biofertility side. You know, you can get into whether you group them or separate them based off of this or that, but at the end of the day, those are tools that growers can implement that, you know, could do anything from, we have a product called Nutritia N, which is a foliar applied nitrogen fixing bacteria. So it's actually helping that plant produce nitrogen within the leaves. It could be other things, you know, like stress mitigation. And so there's a broad range of product types in that biostimulant, biofertility, but that's kind of how I'd start to go down that path of breaking them down as the biocontrol and biostimulant.
And I think it's important to note here too that realistically biologicals are not new to the ag business at all. As you mentioned, specialty crops, but even in corn and soybean production, this is not new. Soybean inoculant, for that matter, technically could be considered a biological. You know, we're placing rhizobium bacteria on the soybean to help, you know, essentially seed the field, if you will. So that's not unusual. Dairy and beef producers have been using inoculant on forages for years to help in the fermentation process. And those are, you know, live cultures of bugs, if you will. And so this isn't necessarily a new idea. I think maybe the applications of the idea are new in terms of this. But so talk to us a little bit about some of the products that we've got at Corteva and what they're being used for, Brandon, and maybe then even talk a little bit about what our future plans are for products, if you can speak to that at least in a general way.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with, you know, why I think Corteva has gotten into this space and why it's a good company to look for when deciding on implementing a biological into your crop management plan. As you mentioned it, Corteva has a long history of bringing quality products to market. And where I think that really benefits us when entering the biological space is we know what it takes to build a good formulation. We know what it takes to show efficacy. We have the boots on the ground when it comes to our, both on the Pioneer and on the crop protection side. And so we have the service behind our products, and we really have a high standard for what a product should be. Because of the Wild West and some of the lack of regulatory oversight, now that's changing a little bit, but because of that, there's a lot of these smaller players that come to market that, may claim quite a bit of benefits, but when it comes to even as simple as the formulation or going into solution or storage or support at the grower and retail level, I think that's where the industry is lacking today, and I think that's where Corteva can really fill that gap. Is you mentioned bringing credibility, but that's bringing credibility across that product chain from the formulation to the support to et cetera. And so I think that's why we're a good fit for this space. When it comes to some of our products options, I mean, you want me to kind of run through our lineup today here, or what are you hoping to get out of that?
On the podcast, we've talked about Utrisha N on a couple different occasions and have had some of the folks from the Nutrient Maximizer group, folks that will have listened to the podcast regularly will have remembered those conversations. That's certainly, I know, part of it, and almost kind of, I say, maybe the initial offering for this portfolio, but I know that we have a number of others. You mentioned stress mitigators earlier. I know that we've got a couple of those. I know that we've got a couple bioinsecticides. And so I guess what I'm hoping to do is just give folks some insight into what our portfolio looks like right now, maybe not quite at inception, but early on, just so folks can see kind of maybe the direction that we're headed as Corteva with our biologicals right now.
Sure. So what I like about the approach that we're taking when it comes to a product, so we talked about the market in general, but when it comes to how we're going about bringing a product, we're being very intentional on entering the market with a product that has a main use. So when we talk about a product like Sostea Stress, we're going after that stress mitigation market. We're not going to claim that it has 10 other benefits, which can be confusing for a grower to determine what is the value to my farm when you're saying that it has root stimulation, it has all of these different types of benefits. When it comes to making a decision and integrating them into a crop management program, we're being very intentional in that way. So I like that. So we have a product called Sostea Stress. That's a foliar product, and that allows growers, as stress is going to be coming on, mainly in the form of drought and heat stress, you can make that application. And Sostea, so it would be a foliar application. On corn, you could do around, tassel timing. And that's going to help regulate the stomata more efficiently, so there's less water loss. It's going to help. It's got products in there that'll kind of treat it like a sponge, so that as that water is, going through from the roots up into the leaves, it's actually keeping that water near the cells and in the cells, so that the plant is able to regulate that stress more efficiently. And so it's a stress mitigation tool, and that I think as a great example of the exciting new space, because if you think of a dry land setting, a guy that doesn't have irrigation capabilities, water is one of those things that, man, you're at the mercy of, both when you have too much of it and too little of it. And so Sostea Stress gives growers a tool that they can use to help manage that drought and heat stress. So it's cool to be able to help growers in ways that we traditionally haven't been able to, and Sostea Stress is one example of that.
Now, Brian, when Brandon was mentioning, kind of the beginning of our portfolio here at Corteva, I think about the Pioneer side of the business and how within our seed treatment enterprise, we got a couple of biofungicides, with what is it, L2030 on beans and L2012 on corn. On beans, if memory serves, that helps us on Rhizoctonia a little bit. And on the 2012 side of things, I don't know if that's Pythium that we're helping, or it could be some other waterborne pathogens in that department. But it's kind of that it's kind of that combination where you have that biocontrol, where you're preventing that disease, but then you're also getting a little bit of extra, I guess, a little extra vigor oftentimes with that type of product and approach. And so for those of you that are listening and maybe skeptics, count me among them. There's a lot that's taking place within the biological world. And like Brandon said, there's not a whole lot to substantiate it from a regulatory space, nor from university trials or anything of that nature. So we're all learning together here. But knowing that we've actually got several years of experience with biologicals within your Pioneer seed that you've been purchasing. It's just not something that we've been out there, with the air horn saying, hey, check out this biological that we're using with you. It's part of the package. And so I think that as Brandon and team are bringing on more of these concepts, more of these products, you're not necessarily going to see them replace what's currently in the system, but they're going to complement it. And so like he was sharing on the stress mitigation front, not a whole lot that a guy can do in terms of keeping water in the corn plant. Besides, there's folks that have made attempts to, put a strobilurin fungicide out there in hopes that it'll help with that quote unquote stress mitigation. But this is a product that's actually built to do that, as opposed to just maybe an ancillary benefit that you might get for something that's out there to kill disease or prevent disease. So I think it'll be interesting to see what other concepts come about and see how we can layer it into a more highly intensive management system. And that's what's taking place in the specialty crop side of things. There, you got a higher value crop, so you're able to pour the coals to it a little bit more and try to, do things either more efficiently or create more yield. And so by optimizing that system, we're taking those approaches here on the commodity side of things too. And I think we're all going to be better for it.
So Brandon, go ahead.
No, I think you bring up a good point there, Carl. And I think, often we have been using biologicals in different facets, as Brian even mentioned earlier. But I think, and that's maybe a term that we need to get over, is when you hear biological, there's a stigma attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
If we're calling them biological solutions, but what they really are, that should be switched. We have solutions that happen to be biological.
Yeah.
If they're going to help the grower, whether it's a biological or not, I mean, you can get into some of the organic or not, but when it comes to what a grower sees as value, it's a solution. The difference is we're just coming about it in a different way, and we're getting to solve that problem in a different way that we haven't done so in the past. So I think Absolutely. That is a stigma that I think we're going to have to address a little bit.
I think that's fair. I think that also comes into my next question to you, as you were kind of sharing with us the directions on why biologicals. One of the things that you mentioned was actually consumer demand, Brandon. I want to dig into that a little bit more, because obviously our customers are the growers that are listening to this podcast, but ultimately the customers for the grower are the consumer. And so talk to us a little bit about your comment about consumer demand and what that looks like, and the questions that consumers are asking that are starting to drive these solutions that we're talking about today.
Sure. I think a good way to discuss that is just in the form of examples. You're seeing legislation come into place when it comes to nitrogen management in groundwater, for example. So maybe that's not a consumer saying, I want a vegetable, or I want corn that is treated with less nitrogen. That's not what they're saying, but they're saying, I care about the fish, or I care about this aspect. How do we go about it? And of course, the grower is going to be the one on the backside of that, and that's a whole different debate. But that's what I think is the gist of consumer demand. Is it's not always directly related to a crop, especially when you think of some of the row crops, but it is more so related to a mentality or an issue that gets brought up. And so that's where you take a product like Utrisha, and it's a fully applied nitrogen fixing bacteria. So that's colonizing the leaves. You're not going to have groundwater, potentially groundwater issues. That's again a whole nother debate. But that's one example of changing consumer demand. Another one would be when it comes to, we saw the changes with Lorsban. That's a very specific product that got a lot of press, and because of that, because of what the kind of the I don't know if it's necessarily the consumer, but because there was a lot of hype around that product, we saw those changes take place. And so it's just kind of that ship just kind of moves back and forth. And I think we're in one of those times where it's lined up with the developments in R&D to go down this approach with crop management plans.
Now, one of the things you also mentioned in there, which is again one of your points as we talked or started our conversation, was about, regulation. We obviously want safe products, not only for our crops but for our consumer. I know this landscape around what regulation looks like for these biological solutions is starting to change a little bit. Ebb a little bit more towards some level of regulation. Talk to us about where we're at currently with the regulation landscape, the regulatory landscape on these products, and then where maybe, based on your experience thus far, where you think we may be headed with that. And really, I guess, maybe in terms of providing some level of confidence or validity to these products as we move forward.
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act, because I think we all in the ag industry have seen the impacts of a lot of regulation, and so I think that can lend itself to different types of challenges. But so where we're at today, there are biologicals that are EPA registered. EPA registered essentially just means that they have looked at that product, and you're having to show that it is doing what it's saying it's doing. What's in the jug is what's in the jug. So we have products that are, from a fungicide standpoint, that is EPA registered. And so that is one layer of, kind of trust that you can look. If you're looking at, hey, I'm thinking about incorporating a biological, not all biologicals can or have to be EPA registered, but for the crop protection side of things, that is a one layer that might be good for a grower to take a look at and say, okay, it does have that registration, so it probably has been vetted more than some other types of products. So that's on the crop protection side. When it comes to the biostimulant side, that's where there's a lack of continuity across types of products and across states.
Go ahead, Brandon.
So with biostimulants, it's kind of a balancing act, because they're oftentimes just approved at the state level, and each state has different criteria and qualifications for what they need to see to be able to register at that state level. Some of them would be more registered as soil amendments or fertility. Others have biostimulant types language and sections that can be looked at a little more closely. So that's where I would recommend, if you're looking at a biostimulant that you're where we're at today, I would recommend, talking with a trusted advisor, going with a company that's reputable. And I think that's because that company's reputation is going to be a guiding light as we start to build that regulatory framework, over the next 10 years or so, or however long that's going to take. So if it's EPA registered, that's something that I would recommend looking for the crop protection, as I mentioned, and then going with a reputable company that you're familiar with, that has some data behind it, that has a label that looks like a label that would have some validity when it comes to listing out some of the ingredients, etc. So those would be two things, at least where we're at today, from a validity standpoint, that I would recommend. What Corteva is doing in this space, since we've entered this market, over the last couple of years, we've actually been very engaged on the regulatory level, working with even folks like the USDA and some of the third-party groups that you see, so that we're getting engaged, that we're helping be at the table as they're starting to make some of this regulatory oversight, so that we can ensure that it's fair for all parties, fair for the grower, fair for the registrant, fair for the consumer, and has the right level of information that's required while not making it, so difficult that we're limiting the tools that growers are going to be able to have. So that would be the other thing that we're doing outside of registering our products in the methods that I've mentioned is, trying to have a seat at the table and be involved in those discussions.
One of the thoughts I had as you were sharing that, Brandon, I'm curious about intellectual property on a lot of these biologicals. I mean, are these things that as an organization, not only Corteva, but these other companies that are developing these products, are these patentable products to protect your intellectual property? How will that work? I'm sure that's part of the discussions that we're engaging with USDA and EPA, but currently where does that sit as part of this as well?
It also is very broad right now when it comes to whether it be a biostimulant, biofertility, or biocontrol type product on how they're getting patented. And so, yeah, that's a whole different discussion that is probably for another day, but there's a lot of things that you can do from a formulation standpoint. So, when you think of what's going into that product, that's one level of kind of security for that product that you have. So it really all comes down to what we're talking about, whether it be a biostimulant, whether it be even under that an amino acid, et cetera. So there's a lot of differences there on the patent protection.
So
Okay.
Brian, as we're talking about this, I'm just thinking about the folks that I work with and the questions they might have. Brandon, I'm curious, as a farmer, what should I look for beyond seeing if a product is labeled and I guess has that EPA registration? What are some of the questions I should be asking of an individual that's touting a certain biological product? Just thinking about it from the farm perspective.
Yeah, I would start with looking at your crop management plan as a whole, looking at what some of the struggles that you've had over the last couple of years. So, for example, because that'll kind of guide you into what type of a product might fit for you if you're curious about integrating. So, for example, we've been hammered with drought. Well, we talked about that product earlier that can help in that way. Or we even have a new product that we're going to be launching that allows for increased phosphorus availability to plants that would otherwise be tied up in the soil. And so, what are the problems that you're looking at solving? And then maybe just doing a little bit of research to see if there is a solution that might make sense. Once you get to that point where, I think that there is a product, maybe I've heard about it, maybe somebody's talked about it, that's where I would start to ask those questions around, has it been trialed? Is there trial work that they can provide? Do they understand what the storage requirements are for me? Maybe there is requirements to have it refrigerated, but at least if they have that clearly laid out, that's a big benefit. If they know the shelf life of a product, that's another thing that can help guide you to where deciding whether or not it's a reputable company. Tank mix things, if you're going to be putting it at plant or you're going to be putting it with a fungicide, what is the compatibility? So those would be some of the questions that I would ask when trying to integrate these things. And I think that lends itself to another part of this discussion, which is performance in the field. I think because when we think of biologicals, sometimes that term snake oil gets thrown out there, and maybe it's performance at times is not going to be, when you spray a residual herbicide, 95% control, 100% control. But I think what a lot of that comes down to, I mentioned the formulation thing earlier, but what I think a lot of that comes down to is we just got to get better at putting the right product in the right situation. It's not going to be as easy as just saying fungicide across every acre, et cetera. It's how I kind of think of it is you wouldn't spray a post-emergent herbicide if you didn't have any weeds that were emerged. And I think sometimes we think of biologicals as, well, I'm going to put it out there because I want to incorporate a biological, but maybe it just wasn't the right situation, the right environment, the right timing. So it does take another level of kind of, research and understanding. But I think that's where you can increase that win rate is when you're putting the right product in the right situation, and hopefully the right company that you're working with can help you do so.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. No different than making a seed purchase decision. Don't get hung up on one location for 1 year. When you're evaluating the performance data of a product, you gotta lean on the laws of statistics. The more replications you have out there, the more confidence you have in what that product is going to repeat that type of performance. So looking for lots of locations, more than just a year. And I think that's where Corteva can bring a lot of value as a biological supplier, is that when you have the footprint, like we do in this industry, you have the ability to put out, a very thorough research initiative before you go to launch a product, where maybe a smaller mom and pop type shop may come across some fantastic, strain of some bacterium that they want to use, but like you said, formulation, maybe there's, like you said, restrictions with what you can tank mix, what time of day is best for that product to be applied. All those things, they don't get flushed out until you've done all of that replicated research. And if you are working with a provider that can't share those types of details with you, then no, you're probably going to be doing that research for them, and the likelihood of you having that success rate is going to be far lower. So I think that's where that opportunity to partner with kind of a proven commodity like there is with folks like you, Ryan, and myself today, I think is where we can bring a lot of value to the farm gate.
Well, and I think I would also share in Brandon's thoughts that these products are very specific. This idea that I'm just going to throw a biological out and I'm going to fix a whole host of issues in my field, it just isn't realistic. That's just not the way biology works as a general rule anyway, whether we're doing it with these products or whether it's in, its natural state. It's not going to fix just every problem. And I think a targeted approach, I think Brandon's advice about, hey, what are the issues that I have, a gap analysis in my crop plan, and where am I having issues, and is there a product? That's an excellent approach. Just this idea to throw something out there and see what happens. I think that's part of the reason why so many of these products continue to be labeled with that snake oil moniker, because everybody thinks that they'll do everything, and that's just simply not true. And I think this more targeted approach by Corteva is the right direction to go. These products are being designed for a particular reason, and we need to use them for that reason and that specific issue, not just to throw them out there and see what sticks to the wall.
Yep.
Well, Brandon, we've covered a pretty good amount of ground. I mean, we could get into the weeds, if you will, on this. This is, as Carl mentioned, something that I'm incredibly interested in personally. But is there anything else that we maybe haven't covered for the sake of the podcast, at least from an introductory standpoint, that we should talk about before we let you go and close the episode?
No, I think we covered a lot of good topics here. The last thing I would leave you from a Corteva sense is we're trying to do it right. We're trying to make it easy on growers. We talked about a lot of different aspects of what it takes to bring a good product to market, and hopefully you'll see that as some of our products continue to get launched, that we're being very intentional in the use. We're making sure that the formulations are right. You've got the support in the field, and that we're putting it in the right spot for success. So that's that would be the last little piece of salesmanship on my end.
Well, we know that this is a key part of Corteva's future. Our CEO, Chuck, has talked about this as a key part of the crop protection portfolio moving forward. We've made some acquisitions in that space. Can you speak just briefly to what that future for Corteva does look like?
Absolutely. I think with where we were with our research and development capabilities prior to some of these purchases, we're really good at a lot of things. We're really good at having good corn hybrids. We're really good at bringing traditional crop protection chemistries to market, but just the R&D development of biologicals is a little different than some of our traditional, some of what we've done in the past. And so you've seen maybe in the news our acquisition of products, companies like Symborg and Stoller. And what I would say about why we made those purchases is Symborg has an excellent research and development capability. So they're really good at finding, whether it be new strains, finding new ways to develop biologicals from an R&D standpoint. And so that fits into our piece where we know what it takes to bring a good quality product to market, but Symborg has that R&D capabilities to find us what that good quality product is. Stoller, they're maybe in the U.S. maybe a little smaller than they are in, like, let's say Latin America or in South America, but they really do have the ability to sell and market products in some of those geographies. And so that's where they're going to fit into that piece, is their ability to have that operational excellence and the ability to help us scale these products. And so I think that's when you think about what it takes to bring a good quality product to market, Symborg and Stoller are both fitting into that puzzle and helping us create a well-rounded company.
All right, great. Carl, anything else for Brandon before we let him go today?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, we could, like you said, we could do this for 3 more hours. This, we just tapped the keg, Brian. So, no, this was a treat. This was that good, kind of flying at that 30,000 foot level. I think we did, uncover a lot of the questions that growers have, at least got the ball rolling, primed the pump. And so hopefully Brian and I can go deeper as we have those, more intimate type of meetings with farmers here over the next month or two. And as a listener, if you want more information on this space, obviously we have, like Brandon said, the boots on the ground to do that. But specific questions, let us know. If there's a specific product that you are hearing about and you want a second opinion, let us be those third-party arbiters. And we're just as curious as you are, because our job at the end of the day is to help you optimize your crop plan and ensure that you're bringing the most bushels to the table at harvest in an economically responsible way. So if we can be a part of helping you identify opportunities, that's what we're here to do as a team. And so, like I said, I would love to, keep visiting with Brandon here this morning, but out of respect for the listener's time and his time, we'll wrap her up here, I think. Brian, how about you? Anything we didn't get to uncover that you're dying to?
Not really. I mean, I'm with you. We can certainly have Brandon back on and talk about this a little bit more, maybe dive into some of these specific products a little bit more. One thing I will mention, Carl, is that part of that team is not only you and I on the Pioneer side, but the heavy lifting on a lot of these biologicals will be done by our crop protection counterparts. These will be part of the crop protection portfolio moving forward. And so those folks working with their retail accounts and things, that will be where a lot of this heavy lifting, boots on the ground piece will happen. And so we'd be remiss if we didn't give those folks a shout out as well. And we've had some of those folks on the podcast in the past as well, and we'll continue to as we have these conversations. So Brandon, if somebody does have some really deep questions about the biological space for Corteva, how can they follow along or get information from you? What's the best way to maybe get their hands on some of this biological information?
Yeah, I'd probably direct them towards their local, either territory manager that they might work with, or even their Pioneer folks, and have them ask some questions, and that could either eventually get up to me, but there's a lot of smart folks in the field that are getting their hands wet on biologicals. So a lot of folks are going to be able to help you even at that field level.
All right. Well, we certainly appreciate your time today, and am glad that you are part of this new market as we move forward and helping educate guys like Carl and I and our growers as well. So we appreciate the time today on the podcast. Carl, if somebody wants to get a hold of you or maybe post some questions that we can get to Brandon, how can they do that?
Yeah, do that on Twitter at CJorn or on Facebook at CJorn Agronomy. And Brian, if somebody's got a hot label that they want you to take a look at, where may they reach out to you?
Yeah, the best place would be B_K_Schrader on Instagram, or at my Pioneer email at brian.schrader@pioneer.com. So with that, we'll call this an episode. Appreciate Brandon Emery our biological crop protection portfolio manager, joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you got any questions, please send them along. If you got ideas for a topic that you'd like us to cover on the podcast, please do that as well at any of the social media accounts that we talk about on a weekly basis. We hope you have a good week, and we'll talk to you next week on the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy Podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode from the Pioneer Agronomy team. Be sure to visit pioneer.com/podcasts to access additional episodes and learn more about our extensive on-farm data and innovative digital tools that are fueling forward-thinking farming.